I didn't initially aim to reconstruct a civilization widely believed to be mythical, but after spending considerable time analysing the architectural remnants, industrial artefacts and photographic evidence from the mid-1800s to the early 1900s, an unsettling pattern emerged. It wasn't just what was present, but what was conspicuously absent. The lack of explanation, the gaps in the official historical record. I then grasped a deeply troubling realisation. The narrative we've been fed about daily life in the 19th century simply doesn't align with the tangible proof. This includes the enduring structures, the infrastructure still hidden beneath our cityscapes, and the photographs depicting a world far more sophisticated than we've been led to believe. So, I began to ask a different question. Rather than, did Tartaria exist? I pondered, what would everyday life have looked like in a civilization that erected such monuments? This is an exploration into what life truly might have entailed during an era we're told was primitive, pre-industrial and backward. A time when, according to mainstream history, most people endured squalor, travelled by horse, communicated via letters and built with rudimentary tools. Yet, upon examining the actual remains, the roads impeccably graded, the canals precisely engineered, the buildings mathematically exact, a distinct image forms. It's not one of primitive struggle but of organised movement, not of isolation but of connectivity, not of simplicity but of complex systems we've somehow forgotten how to perceive. What was daily existence like in this forgotten realm? What did its inhabitants actually do? How did they commute, toil, trade and reside within structures that appear designed for functions we no longer comprehend? The official story crumbles the moment these questions are posed. Imagine awakening in a Tartarian city at dawn, not in some romanticised past but within the very physical spaces that survive. The apartment blocks with their impossibly high ceilings, 12, 14, 16 feet, far exceeding any practical heating concern. The windows so towering they seem built for giants, or perhaps for an entirely different purpose. Light distribution, air circulation, atmospheric pressure regulation. You rise in a chamber adorned with crown moulding so elaborate it would demand months for contemporary artisans to reproduce. Plasterwork that flows like solidified water. Geometric motifs that repeat with mathematical exactness across thousands of edifices in dozens of cities on multiple continents. All supposedly constructed by individual contractors working autonomously, yet all reaching identical design solutions. How is such uniformity achieved? The morning light streams through windows deliberately oriented to solar angles, calculated for seasonal variations. The entire edifice appears aligned with natural forces, wind, sun, water flow, in ways our modern buildings entirely neglect. You don attire seen in photographs, formal, layered, meticulously tailored. Not primitive homespun but industrially manufactured textiles indicating large-scale production. Cotton from India, silk from Asia, wool from Australia. All accessible in provincial towns thousands of miles from their origins, arriving with suspicious regularity, as if transported through distribution networks far more advanced than horse-drawn wagons could support. The unavoidable question becomes, what infrastructure facilitated this? If you find this inquiry compelling, please consider subscribing or becoming a YouTube member. This kind of research necessitates hundreds of hours in archives that most historians never consult. Your support enables the continuation of asking questions that conventional history evades. You step outside onto streets that present their own enigmas. Not dirt paths nor randomly laid cobblestones, but precisely graded thorough thoroughfares, with drainage systems so sophisticated they still function today over a century later. Storm drains connected to subterranean networks extending for miles, sewage systems rivaling modern engineering, water distribution channels that supplied entire cities with pressurized flow, all allegedly built within a few decades across the globe, adhering to identical principles. The streets themselves reveal the pattern, too wide for simple cart traffic, too perfectly aligned with cardinal directions to be accidental. In city after city the same layout emerges, grand boulevards radiating from central points, forming geometric patterns discernible only from above. Star formations, radial designs, mathematical precision suggesting central planning on a scale we're told didn't exist. And the movement along these streets, this is where the official story becomes indefensible. Photographs from the 1860s, 1870s, 1880s show bustling streets. Not chaotic medieval congestion but organised flow. Streetcars operating on rails with electrical or cable systems demanding massive infrastructure investment. Omnibuses on fixed routes implying coordinated scheduling. Carriages, yes, but moving within a system, not haphazardly. The deeper I delved, the more evidence I uncovered of transportation networks we're taught emerged much later. Street railways in hundreds of cities by the 1880s. Cable car systems requiring underground machinery, elevated trains in major centres, all appearing with suspicious simultaneity, all demanding engineering expertise supposedly unavailable. Who orchestrated this? Who conceived it? Who possessed the surveying capability, the mathematical knowledge, the organisational capacity to implement identical systems across continents? The silence in the historical record is deafening. But the streets were merely one system. The canals reveal something even more perplexing. I devoted months to examining canal records across Europe, Asia and North America. Not the famous ones like the Erie Canal or Suez, but the thousands of smaller waterways linking cities, towns, industrial hubs. The network was vast, coordinated, precisely engineered with lock systems, water level management and seasonal flow regulation. The Grand Canal in China, over 1,000 miles, connecting major river systems, moving goods and people with an efficiency that wouldn't be matched until the advent of rail. The canal networks of the Netherlands, Belgium, northern France. Hundreds of miles of interconnected waterways with standardized dimensions suggesting unified planning. The British canal system at its peak comprised 4,000 miles of navigable waterways, all constructed in roughly 60 years, all compatible, all precisely graded. This wasn't primitive infrastructure, this was systems engineering. Barges traversed these canals with cargoes traceable through port records. Grain from the interior, manufactured goods from cities, raw materials to factories. The volume was staggering. Single barges carrying loads that would necessitate dozens of wagons, networks moving thousands of tons daily. All coordinated through a system of schedules, toll points and transfer stations that implied central administration. And here's the most peculiar aspect. The engineering required to sustain these networks was extraordinary. Water level management across hundreds of miles, lock systems synchronized for passage, pumping stations to elevate water, reservoir systems to manage seasonal fluctuations. Where did this expertise originate? How did it disseminate so rapidly? Why does the historical record show no learning curve, no period of experimentation, but rather fully formed systems appearing almost concurrently? The pattern recurs with unsettling precision. Beyond the canals, beyond the streets, another system operated. The overland trade routes, which we're told were primitive merchant trails, were in fact sophisticated corridors of movement. The Silk Road wasn't a singular path, but a network of routes with established stations, water sources and rest points positioned at precise intervals. Not random stops, but planned infrastructure. Russian archives contain references to caravans crossing Central Asia with hundreds of camels, transporting valuable goods, operating on schedules that demanded coordination across thousands of miles. These weren't wandering merchants, these were organised enterprises moving through established systems. The stations along these routes posed their own questions. Caravanserais in Persia, Central Asia and Turkey. Massive structures with courtyards capable of accommodating hundreds of travellers and animals. Water systems, storage facilities, defensive walls. All built to identical specifications, as if adhering to architectural standards disseminated across empires. Within these structures, evidence of trade abounds. Goods from China appearing in European markets. European manufactures reaching Asian cities. African products distributed across continents. All moving through networks requiring an organisation we're told didn't exist. The coordination problem becomes overwhelming. How do you synchronize movement across continents without communication technology? How do you establish trade standards, currency exchange and contract enforcement across linguistic and cultural barriers? How do you transport valuable goods thousands of miles through multiple jurisdictions without centralized authority? The official explanation that this somehow emerged organically collapses under scrutiny. And then there are the airships. This is where conventional historians cease listening, where the documented evidence becomes too uncomfortable to acknowledge. But the records exist. Patent applications for dirigibles, balloons and lighter-than-air craft throughout the mid-1800s. Newspaper accounts of aerial exhibitions. Engineering journals discussing propulsion systems, gas production and navigation techniques. Photographs depicting structures that could only be airship mooring stations. Tall masts atop buildings, anchoring points, elevated platforms. I'm not asserting the existence of massive fleets or routine aerial commerce, but the evidence suggests experimentation, development and limited deployment of lighter-than-air transportation that has been systematically erased from the mainstream historical narrative. Why? Consider the implications. If even limited airship travel existed, it fundamentally alters our understanding of information distribution, reconnaissance and rapid elite movement. It suggests a level of technological sophistication incompatible with the primitive narrative we've inherited. The buildings themselves hint at this. Rooftop structures with no apparent purpose, elevated platforms on government buildings, architectural elements that only make sense if imagined as landing or mooring points for aerial craft. Once you perceive it, it becomes impossible to unsee. Accounts from World's Fairs, the Paris Exposition, the Chicago Columbian Exposition, describe aerial demonstrations, tethered balloons carrying passengers, and discussions of future aerial navigation. Then, after 1900, these references largely vanish. Not because the technology failed, but because something shifted in how we documented technological development. What transpired? What changed? Why does the historical record exhibit such a dramatic discontinuity? Yet, daily life unfolded within these structures, and that is where the mystery deepens. The buildings themselves reveal functions we've been taught to ignore. Not merely homes or factories, but spaces designed for specific purposes we no longer recognise. Basements extend far deeper than necessary for storage. Multi-level underground chambers with brick archways, drainage systems and mysterious equipment mounts. Official history labels them cellars or foundation spaces, but the engineering is too deliberate. Sealed chambers, pressure-resistant walls, connection points for pipes leading to unknown destinations. The main floors show evidence of integrated systems we've removed and forgotten. Wall cavities too large for simple utilities. Shaft systems extending through multiple stories, central courtyards with glass ceilings suggesting light wells. But engineered with such precision they must have served additional purposes. The upper floors pose their own questions. Ceiling heights that decrease as you ascend. Why? Ventilation systems far more sophisticated than required for basic air circulation. Rooftop structures with astronomical alignment suggesting observation or measurement purposes. And throughout, the ornamentation. Not mere decorative flourishes but mathematical patterns, geometric progressions, symbolic systems that repeat across continents. Official history dismisses this as architectural style, but the precision implies a meaning we've lost. The rhythm of daily work exposes the most troubling anomalies. The factories depicted in photographs are not primitive workshops. They are massive structures with floor-to-ceiling machinery, precision equipment and assembly systems demanding coordination among hundreds of workers. The scale of production appears instantly, with no transition period, no gradual mechanization. Textile mills in New England producing millions of yards of fabric annually by the 1830s. Steel foundries in Germany operating at an industrial scale by the 1850s. Ceramic factories in England, glassworks in Bohemia, chemical plants in France, all appearing within decades, all requiring expertise supposedly unavailable. The workforce presents its own enigma. Photographs show workers in these facilities dressed formally, operating complex machinery with apparent proficiency. Where did this training originate? How did thousands of workers across multiple industries simultaneously acquire specialized knowledge? The official story speaks of an industrial revolution, of gradual technological progress, of inventors and entrepreneurs driving change. But the physical evidence suggests something different. Inherited systems, repurposed infrastructure, technology deployed rather than developed. Within these factories, one finds equipment that shouldn't exist. Precision metalworking machinery requiring tolerances measurable in thousandths of an inch. Hydraulic systems operating at pressures modern engineers respect. Electrical generation equipment appearing decades before Edison. Chemical processes demanding knowledge of molecular structures supposedly unknown. And the coordination across facilities. Standardized parts appearing in the 1850s, interchangeable components manufactured in different cities, different countries, all compatible, assembly line techniques emerging simultaneously in multiple industries, all requiring systems thinking, central planning, and information distribution that we're told didn't exist. The evidence points to something much grander than individual invention. Daily commerce in these cities reveals the deepest mystery. Markets operating with price coordination across continents. Goods arriving from thousands of miles away with predictable regularity. Currency exchange systems facilitating transactions across dozens of monetary standards. Credit instruments, bills of exchange and commercial contracts implying sophisticated financial infrastructure. This was not barter. This was not simple trade. This was integrated commerce demanding information technology that, we're told, only came with the telegraph and telephone. Yet records show coordinated pricing, synchronized commodity movements and arbitrage opportunities exploited across oceanic distances, all before electronic communication. How? The market buildings themselves tell part of the story. Grand structures with climate control systems, refrigeration capabilities and storage facilities engineered for specific goods. Not primitive stalls, but organized exchanges with administrative overhead, regulatory frameworks and standardized measurements. The deeper I investigated, the more I found evidence of commercial networks operating with clockwork precision. Tea from China arriving in London on schedule. Cotton from America processed in Manchester mills. Grain from Ukraine feeding European cities. All moving through systems requiring coordination that seems impossible without modern technology. And the financial instruments, letters of credit honoured across empires, insurance contracts covering shipments worldwide, investment syndicates funding projects on multiple continents, all requiring trust, verification and enforcement mechanisms that imply institutional structures we've been taught didn't exist. The coordination problem becomes mathematically impossible to explain through conventional means. The question of how society was organised unveils layers of mystery. Official history portrays the 1800s as a period of emerging democracy, declining aristocracy and a rising middle class. But the physical evidence, the buildings, the infrastructure, the coordination of massive projects, suggests an administrative capacity far exceeding what electoral government supposedly commanded. Who planned the cities? Who coordinated the canal networks? Who standardized the railways? Who enforced the commercial regulations? The buildings offer clues, Administrative structures in every major city imposing edifices with record-keeping facilities, communication centres and assembly halls, not primitive town halls but sophisticated bureaucratic centres implying an extensive governmental apparatus. Membership organisations appear ubiquitously in the records. Trade guilds, professional societies, fraternal orders, philosophical associations, all operating internationally, all maintaining communications, all seemingly coordinating activity across political boundaries. The pattern suggests parallel structures of authority, not replacing official governments but operating alongside them, coordinating the systems that enable daily life to function. Standards bodies, professional certifications, technical protocols, these organisations left minimal documentation. Their activities were considered internal matters, but their influence is evident in the uniformity of outcomes. Identical building codes across nations, standardised engineering practices on multiple continents, coordinated responses to technical challenges. When you map these networks, when you trace the connections between cities, institutions and projects, a picture emerges of organisational capacity that official history cannot account for. Daily cultural life raises questions historians prefer to avoid. Ideas disseminated too rapidly. Architectural styles appearing simultaneously in distant cities. Musical trends emerging in multiple countries within months. Literary movements, philosophical concepts, scientific theories distributed across continents with suspicious rapidity. Before the telegraph, before the telephone, before wireless communication. The official explanation invokes mail systems, travelling intellectuals and published journals, but the timeline doesn't fit. The synchronicity is too precise. Examine the world's fairs. Massive international exhibitions coordinating participation from dozens of nations showcasing technologies supposedly in early development, demonstrating organisational capacity requiring years of planning and communication. The 1851 Crystal Palace Exhibition, the 1889 Paris Exposition, the 1893 Chicago Columbian Exposition, all involving global coordination on scales that seem impossible. The buildings constructed for these exhibitions reveal the deepest mystery. Temporary structures supposedly, yet engineered with permanent precision. The Crystal Palace, nearly 1 million square feet of glass and iron constructed in months, then disassembled and relocated. The Paris exhibition structures, elaborate buildings spanning hundreds of acres, appearing as if conjured, then vanishing from the historical record. Where did the expertise come from? Where did it go? Cultural products themselves exhibit the pattern. Sheet music published simultaneously in New York, London, Paris, Vienna. Books appearing in multiple languages within weeks. Fashion trends spreading across oceans before photographs could document them. Scientific discoveries announced in different countries on the same day. The evidence suggests information distribution systems we've been taught didn't exist. As the workday concluded and people returned home, they entered spaces equipped with technologies that shouldn't have existed. Gas lighting systems requiring underground distribution networks, indoor plumbing connected to pressurized water systems, heating systems with thermostatic controls, ventilation networks regulating air quality, all supposedly primitive, yet engineered with a sophistication that modern buildings struggle to match. The gas systems alone present overwhelming questions. How do you safely distribute combustible gas through hundreds of miles of underground pipes? How do you regulate pressure across a network serving thousands of buildings? How do you manage seasonal demand variation? How do you prevent leaks, explosions, and contamination? Yet, by the 1850s, major cities possessed these fully operational systems. Not experimental, not developing, but mature infrastructure serving entire populations. The water systems display even more sophisticated engineering. Reservoir construction demanding geological surveys, aqueduct systems spanning dozens of miles, filtration facilities employing chemical processes, distribution networks with pressure regulation, flow control, and contamination prevention. All appearing within decades across dozens of cities, adhering to identical principles. Inside homes, the evidence of coordination persists. Standardized fixtures, compatible fittings, interchangeable parts, all suggesting manufacturing coordination, distribution systems, and commercial networks operating at an industrial scale before the supposed Industrial Revolution reached maturity. The domestic space reveals the final impossibility. How did ordinary people working ordinary jobs afford these technologies? How did infrastructure requiring massive capital investment serve middle-class populations? How did systems demanding constant maintenance, skilled operation, and technical support become ubiquitous? The economics simply don't add up unless something fundamental is missing from our understanding. After dark, the city transformed. Street lighting appeared far earlier than official history acknowledges. Not primitive oil lamps, but organised systems with central control, standardised fixtures, and coordinated maintenance. By the 1860s, major cities possessed street lighting networks covering miles of thoroughfares. The power sources raise immediate questions. Gas required underground distribution. Electricity required generation facilities, distribution networks, and voltage regulation. Arc lighting required precision equipment, carbon electrodes, and current control, all supposedly in primitive development yet deployed at urban scale. Photographs from the period show nighttime activity incompatible with primitive lighting. Streets filled with traffic after dark, commercial districts operating late hours, public spaces illuminated for safety and navigation, all requiring infrastructure investment that seems economically impossible. And the buildings themselves illuminate mysteries. Windows glowing with interior light, powered by systems we're told were barely experimental. Entire facades lit for display or orientation. Rooftop lights visible for miles, suggesting navigation or signalling purposes. Who orchestrated this? Who financed it? Who possessed the technical knowledge to implement electrical systems decades before Edison, Tesla and Westinghouse supposedly pioneered the technology? The pattern repeats, mature systems appearing without documented development, spreading without apparent diffusion mechanisms, operating with expertise that seems inherited rather than invented. This brings us to the central question this investigation cannot evade. What happened to the knowledge? Not just technical knowledge, engineering principles, manufacturing techniques and coordination protocols, but the conceptual frameworks that made these systems possible. The understanding of how to organize cities, move populations, distribute goods and coordinate commerce across continents. The discontinuity is stark. Examine engineering journals from the 1880s and you find sophisticated discussions of hydraulic systems, atmospheric pressure applications and energy distribution networks. By 1920, these discussions have largely disappeared, replaced by different paradigms, different assumptions and different technologies. It's as if an entire knowledge base was systematically supplanted. Building techniques exhibit the same pattern. 19th century structures demonstrate construction methods we can no longer replicate economically. Not because we lack tools, but because we've lost the systematic knowledge of material properties, structural principles, and integrated design thinking that enabled those buildings. The infrastructure reveals it most clearly. We excavate basements and discover network systems we don't comprehend. We demolish buildings and unearth mechanical apparatus we cannot identify. We examine water management systems and recognize an engineering sophistication we struggle to duplicate. This was not primitive technology gradually improving. This was sophisticated knowledge systematically forgotten. Ask yourself why. Why would advanced capabilities be abandoned? Why would efficient systems be replaced with inferior alternatives? Why would coordinated networks be dismantled in favor of fragmented solutions? The official narrative offers no answers because it denies the premise. We're told there was nothing to lose, that progress moved linearly forward, that each generation built upon the previous with steady advancement. But the physical evidence utterly contradicts this. What did daily life feel like as this knowledge vanished? Imagine living through the transition, growing up in cities with comprehensive infrastructure, coordinated systems and sophisticated technologies, then witnessing their dismantling, replacement and forgetting. Seeing the canal networks abandoned for railways, the gas systems supplanted by inferior electrical grids, the architectural knowledge lost as standardized construction replaced integrated design. The records from the early 1900s contain hints of this, complaints about deteriorating services, nostalgia for better days, references to capabilities that existed within living memory but were no longer available. Older residents reminiscing about cleaner streets, purer water, less polluted air, when systems functioned seamlessly rather than demanding constant intervention, when cities felt designed rather than accumulated. But these voices were marginalized, dismissed as romantic reminiscences of an imagined past. The narrative of progress demanded continuous improvement. Any suggestion that capabilities had been lost threatened the fundamental story of modernity. So the knowledge faded, the skills disappeared. The understanding of integrated systems thinking gave way to specialized expertise in narrower domains. The holistic approach to urban design was replaced by single-function solutions. And within a generation, the memory faded sufficiently that we could gaze upon the inherited infrastructure and claim we built it. Look at the sophisticated engineering and declare it primitive. Observe the coordinated systems and insist they emerged randomly. The rhythm of forgetting has its own momentum. Once begun, it accelerates. Today, the evidence is still visible if you know where to look. The buildings that haven't been renovated beyond recognition, the underground infrastructure exposed during construction projects, the canal system still discernible in satellite imagery, the railway grades that follow alignments too perfect for trial and error surveying, the street layouts that reveal geometric patterns from above. Walk through older cities with this perspective and the anomalies become overwhelming. Building after building displaying capabilities that don't align with the official timeline. Infrastructure after infrastructure revealing coordination that shouldn't exist. System after system exhibiting sophistication we're told came later. The pattern is consistent. What remains is more advanced than what replaced it. 19th century railway stations with acoustic engineering that modern architects struggle to achieve. Victorian water systems with pressure regulation that contemporary infrastructure cannot match. Industrial buildings with natural climate control that mechanized systems fail to duplicate. This isn't nostalgia, this isn't romantic reminiscence. This is measurable, documentable physical evidence that the narrative of continuous progress is fundamentally incomplete. Something existed, something sophisticated, something coordinated, something we've been taught never was. And the question becomes unavoidable. What else have we forgotten? I began this investigation expecting to document daily life in a historical period I believed I understood. I discovered instead a mystery that deepens with every archive visited, every photograph examined, every building measured. What was life like in the cities we now refer to as Tartarian? It was, the evidence suggests, more coordinated than we've been told, more sophisticated than official history acknowledges, more interconnected than the available technology supposedly permitted. People moved through systems we can barely comprehend, worked with technologies we've forgotten how to replicate, lived in spaces designed for purposes we no longer recognize, participated in networks of trade, communication and organization that seem impossible without capabilities we're told didn't exist. And then something changed. Not catastrophically, not all at once, but systematically, deliberately, as if by design. The knowledge faded, the systems were dismantled, the infrastructure abandoned or repurposed. The understanding of how it all functioned together disappeared into obscurity. Within a few generations, we couldn't recall. We looked to what remained and invented new stories to explain it. Stories that fit our preferred narrative of progress, of invention, of continuous advancement from primitive to modern. But the buildings remember, the streets remember, the canals, the railways, the underground networks, they all remember a different story. A story of coordination without communication technology, organisation without electronic systems, sophisticated engineering without modern tools, global networks without contemporary transportation. A story we've been systematically taught to forget. The question isn't whether this world existed. The evidence is overwhelming, physical and impossible to dismiss. The question is why we've been so determined not to see it. Why does acknowledging sophisticated 19th century capabilities threaten our modern identity? Why must we insist that everything before us was primitive, limited, backward? Why can't we accept that knowledge is sometimes lost, that civilizations sometimes forget, that progress isn't always linear? What are we protecting by maintaining the official narrative? And more troubling, what else have we forgotten? What other capabilities existed that we can no longer recognize? What other systems operated that we've trained ourselves not to perceive? The buildings stand, waiting for someone to ask the right questions. The infrastructure remains a silent testimony to knowledge we've misplaced. The photographs preserve moments from a world we claim never existed. But it did exist. People lived in it, worked in it, moved through it daily, built lives within systems we've convinced ourselves were impossible. And somewhere in the archives, in the basement storage rooms, in the forgotten engineering journals, the documentation awaits. The evidence accumulates, the pattern becomes undeniable. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. The only question remaining is whether we're willing to look. This investigation continues. The archives are vast, the evidence abundant, the questions multiplying. If you wish to support this research, consider becoming a member or subscribing. Because the deeper we look, the more we find that history isn't what we've been told. And that truth, perhaps, is what we've been forgetting all along. I.